You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Music Tectonics, the podcast that looks at the massive movements shaking up how we imagine music and tech. I'm your host today, Tristan Neuer-Jaeger, Director of Strategy at Rock, Paper, Scissors, the music tech PR firm. I'm really excited to get to chat today with Oleg Stavitsky, the CEO of Endel, as well as one of its 6 co-founders. Endel offers users visually elegant, sonically intriguing, customized experiences designed to enhance focus, relaxation, movement, and other activities. Though amazingly adept as entrepreneurs and tech whizzes, Oleg and his colleagues are also remarkably artful and creative in the way they imagine how to deliver these experiences and how to work with artists like Grimes and James Blake. Oleg himself has an interesting background outside of music, including a stint as a journalist and several other successful tech ventures, including a really cool app that encourages kids' creativity. Oleg, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Hi.
Hi. So first, I would love to talk a little bit about Endel and its basics, the kind of experiences that it provides, et cetera, for folks who may not be that familiar with the app. So can you walk us through a basic Endel session and what the user experiences as they're engaging with the app?
Of course. Yeah, when I'm asked what Endel is, I usually say, look, this is a technology that was built to help you focus, relax, and sleep. Because the way we do that is a little bit more complicated than that. Like the way we do that is we generate a personalized soundscape in real time, on the spot, on the device, again, personalized to you. And our algorithm takes in information like the time of day, the weather, your heart rate, your movement. We plug all of this data into the algorithm and it creates a soundscape in real time, personalized to you. Does it make sense?
That makes absolute sense, yes. So this customization aspect is super interesting. I was curious, and this I'm jumping ahead a little bit here. We'll talk more about your team and the company in a second. But how how did you guys figure out how the sound should respond to someone's context or state of mind, right? So you can respond to heart rate, it could respond to the time of day, to weather, etc. But it's kind of deeper than just you can go really deep if you're talking about customization. I want to hear a little bit about your perspective of what makes a good experience. Like how customized should it be, and how do you decide what fits with what context?
There's 2 scientific pillars behind Endel, right? One is the science of the circadian rhythms, because we all have that internal clock that is built into our bodies that regulates your energy fluctuations during the day. You know how you feel alert in the morning, then you feel sleepy around lunchtime, then you feel alert again. So the way we work with that is we detect your location, and from your location we understand where you are, when the sun rises and sets, where you are, exposure to natural light. And we also couple that with information like your sex, your age, your chronotype. And this allows us to more or less understand where you are right now on the so-called master circadian graph, which is this basically it's a graph that shows you if your energy is going up or down. And actually, during the day, we have a limited number of energy peaks and drops. And your energy is always going either up or down during the day. There's these fluctuations. So this basically informs the algorithm on your current energy state. And this gives us the information on what kind of sound should we be playing right now. Should we sort of help you if your energy is already going up? Like, should we support you? Or if you're trying to focus right now, but your energy, your natural energy is actually going down, should we, help you basically counter that natural energy drop and still help you focus, for example? And this is when the second scientific pillar sort of comes into play, which is the neuroscience of how sound influences your cognitive state. Now, we did not invent that science. There's a lot of research out there that talks about, the specific frequencies, scales, and tones that influence your cognitive state. Just a few examples. For example, we're using an approach called the pentatonic scale, which is known to be very easily processed by the brain and is found in the majority of traditional music
Mm-hmm.
throughout the world, right? Or we're using an approach called sound masking, which is essentially a combination of various colored noises, like pink noise, white noise, brown noise, things like that. And that
Mm-hmm.
helps us kind of mask any unwanted and distracting sounds. And there's a few of these approaches. So we basically, we work with scientific consultants, and they basically instruct us on how we should be working with those inputs that I mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to helping you either focus, relax, and sleep, because that the same input is actually kind of different depending on what you're trying to do right now. Could mean different things, for the algorithm.
What has surprised you most as you've gotten really deep into this and started seeing, feedback from users, et cetera? Are there some audio surprises in there? Like, I never guessed that people would need this when they were in this mind state, for example.
What actually surprised me the most was like how little research there is
Mm-hmm.
available out there on, how specifically sound influences our cognitive state. Because obviously, we started digging into all of these white papers available, and like what the majority of them is saying is, oh, when you're listening to Mozart, it makes you feel more relaxed, and when you're listening to Metallica, it makes you more energized. We were like, oh, really? Wow. I
Well,
mean,
yeah.
breaking news. Yeah, we're like, duh. But like, how about like one step deeper, right? Like,
Mm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and there's almost no research on how exactly specific frequencies, scales and tones, how your brain reacts to them. There's almost none of that.
Hmm.
So we basically we went deeper, and we kind of started doing our own research. And last year we've recruited 50 people, and they were wearing this EEG headbands that
Mm-hmm.
measure your brainwave activity, and we were actually literally measuring people's brainwave activity while they were listening to Endel, and comparing that to their brainwave activity when they were listening to nothing, silence,
Yeah.
or the most popular focus playlists on the DSPs.
Yeah. So this was
And then
dedicated to focus, right? That was
yes,
what you were measuring.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes, exactly. Yeah, they were listening to Endel focus mode specifically, and they were trying to concentrate at this
Mm-hmm.
moment, like performing their task of choice. And we were then able to zoom in on a second by second basis and actually see, what's happening with your brainwave activity when you're listening to a specific beat, for example, right? And a lot of fascinating things. For example, I was looking at someone's brainwave activity when they were listening to a static playlist, and you could see how there's these peaks and drops
Mm-hmm.
throughout the session. And I could then, literally zoom into the playlist and see what kind of songs they were listening to at the time. And the songs themselves, they were not as important, frankly. What was important is that it's just the nature of a static playlist. You're listening to something, and it consists of songs, and those songs have, the beginning, the middle, and an end.
Exactly.
And
So
it's
their
just
brains are
eh,
anticipating the arc of the song, not
yeah,
necessarily responding to the audio input itself. Like it's the perception of the cultural unit of a song versus the perception of
exactly.
audio. Yeah. Oh, fascinating. That's really cool.
And then the song would end,
Uh-huh.
and you could see how when the song ended, the concentration of that particular person went down, and then it would pick up again. So it's
Hmm.
almost distracting because you're getting into the zone, but then you're immediately going out of the zone.
Oh,
And
wow.
then when you look at Endel, what we found is that the consistency of the beat specifically, and that beat is not just some beat, it's synchronized with your average racing heart rate BPM, and this is just something that we came up with.
Mm-hmm.
You could see how we bring people into the zone and we keep them there. That consistency was very, very important because, with Endel focus mode, the beat never stops. And that beat was also, what also was very helpful is that beat was designed by Plastic Man, who was like, the
Yeah.
godfather of minimal techno.
So it was
So
a really good beat. on top of it.
Yes, yeah, it sounded really, really well. So I'm really proud. But it needs to slightly, ever so slightly mutate. It needs to change. It cannot just stay, because it's just gonna, because I mean, your natural response to that would be like, okay, I'm just gonna pick up a techno track and just keep listening to it on repeat.
Yeah.
No, unfortunately, that doesn't work either,
Wow.
because yeah, it needs to change. Otherwise, your brain, just gets used to that beat, and then it just stops working for you. So it needs to keep evolving, and then it needs to take an advantage. It needs to take into account the information, the other information about your energy, about the time of day, weather, all of this. So yeah, all of this was just very, very fascinating, and we were
Yeah.
like, no one has done any research like this before us. So we're more or less in uncharted territory here.
So this is really interesting. And I love that we're sort of circling around this a bit, but it seems like you need, to avoid the switch cost effect. If we're talking about focus, right? You need to avoid too much variety or anything that's too jarring or that fits into these sort of preconceived notions of what music does. But at the same time, you need enough variety so that the stimuli are, there's still like audio stimulus, right? So that's really, really fascinating. So, as so it sounds like you still have a lot of work that could be done in the realm of customization. What are you, without giving anything, anything that you guys have up your sleeves away, how are you thinking about like the next phase in customization? What comes next? I mean, we have everything from like, adaptive stuff for running. There's, things like endo, like you said, for focus that shifts just enough to keep you on point. What's the next level of customization for an audio experience?
There's a couple directions, right? Like they were kind of exploring. I mean, and they were there from day one. This is something that we have envisioned Endel to be from the very beginning. Number one is working with other senses, right? Like how should the light in the room, how should the temperature in the room change depending on your circadian rhythms, depending on what we're trying to do right now. Actually, when we were just going through the Texas Music Acceleration Program in 2018, they've given us this room where we have integrated Endel with smart light system and a smart thermostat, and it was just fascinating to bring people in and just show them how lights go down and temperature changes just because you're switching from focus to relax.
That's
so that's
cool.
one direction.
Nice.
Yeah, and I think we will definitely I don't think we are working on kind of exploring that part, like because Endel is truly it's not just a sound technology. I guess that's what I'm saying. But something that was always a part of our kind of long-term vision was you not having to choose the soundscape or a particular activity, right? Like it's you just pressing play. And so basically, I envision Endel as just this one play button at the end of, like, my end game vision is Endel just has just one button, and you open the app and you just say, hey, start playing. And it takes in all of the information, like your calendar, right? Like it takes in information, all of the other inputs, and it just automatically shifts between focus and relax and different intensities of those soundscapes, and it suggests certain activities. So it is essentially a generative soundtrack to your day. That's how I see Endel, and this is what we're building towards.
That's really cool. So you've mentioned in past presentations that I watched online that you've done a lot of silent meditation and mindfulness work on your own. And I'm wondering, as someone who has worked with silence as a way to cultivate mindfulness or to change your mind state, how does what can audio do that silence can't? What's the importance of sound and music in our our search for finding balance or finding the right level of energy versus sitting in silence, in your experience?
I mean, meditation in complete silence without any audio or sensory or visual stimuli is very, very tough.
Yeah.
Right? And
It's like the grandmaster level, really, for us mere humans.
yeah,
Yeah.
and this comes from someone who has been to 10-day long silent Vipassana retreats, where, you go there,
Yeah.
they take away everything. They take your phone, but that's like they don't allow any reading materials there whatsoever.
Wow.
You're not allowed to talk. Your eye contact is forbidden.
Wow.
So it's just all you do for 10 days is you wake up. I think it's like 4:30 or 5:30. I don't remember. I think it's 4:30 actually, and you just meditate. And you
Uh,
have a few breaks during the day, and that's it. That's all you do, and it does work, right? Like, I know for a
it sounds
fact.
kind of like heaven to this working mom, but I can see how it would also be. You would start hearing stuff in your head that would
Oh yeah.
require a lot of challenging work. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That voice in your head. First of all, there's a lot of voices. It's not just one voice, and you can see how your brain starts. It tries different strategies with you
Hmm.
because it gets really, really, really scared of this kind of more or less like a surgery that starts happening. And it pleads, it threatens you. It's your brain gets very, very scared of this situation. But what I'm saying is, hey, not, and it's when, especially when people are saying, oh, you feel so stressed and the world is crazy, you should try mindfulness meditation right now. And it sounds like such an easy thing to do, but it's
Hmm.
actually a very, very in my mind, it's a very elitist thing these days,
Yeah.
because I know for a fact that in order for mindfulness meditation to really work for you, you need to commit to it, and you need to meditate like an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening, and it's just not a lot of people can just simply make the time for that or afford that
Hmm.
time. And let alone the fact that a lot of people are just didn't have, and it's fine, like not everyone has the discipline or the willpower to kind of really go with this and really start meditating for such a
Well,
long time.
and in in everyone's defense, like the traditions that have these kind of meditative practices all over the world have a lot of like there's like an on ramp and an off ramp. There's a container to hold all this stuff. Whereas in the modern world, we're just like go sit somewhere.
Yeah,
There's no
yeah,
real guidance, and maybe guidance isn't necessarily required, but it's more, there's a lot more to it than that in the traditional methods. And there's a reason why people have to spend years preparing for this kind of activity,
yeah, yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. So in that sense, yes, like if we're talking, an ideal scenario, yes, everyone would be meditating
Mm,
in silence. And the world would be a much better place. Frankly, I firmly believe that. Unfortunately, that's just not, the world that we live in, and we live in a constantly connected world. And I also, this is something I'm quoting in our manifesto on our website, which I wrote, which quotes Marshall McLuhan, who it's crazy. I think it was 1965 and
hmm.
1967. He said, we're using, the media of the old to solve the problems that we are facing as a society right now.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, that's exactly the case. Like, we have these modern apps that deliver practices, mindfulness meditation, that are like thousands of years old. And
Hmm.
it's just like unfortunately, they're just not designed to help us cope with the insane 24/7 connected world that we live in. So this is where sound comes into play in my mind, because it's just the easiest way to control your environment.
Hmm.
What could be easier than put on headphones and just playing something? And we all know the power of sound and the power of music. It's just every single person in this world knows this, right? And even John Cage said that there's no such thing as an absolute silence, right?
Yeah.
Because your body still produces sounds, and everything is a soundscape to me, actually, at this point, frankly. So
Exactly.
it's very hard to be in absolute silence. So I think we should be using sound, and I think sound is the easiest way to kind of take our environment under control.
That's a really It's a really good point. And in some ways, it makes me think a bit about your work with artists. And I'd love to dig into that for a minute here. You've worked with some very distinct, unique, idiosyncratic artists. Like, I mean, Grimes would be Exhibit A, right? She's pretty special. She does her thing, right? And yet you have this very, when you're talking about what Endel is doing and how it's responding, there's some specific kind of parameters that need to be met for it to be effective. So how do you balance the distinctiveness of an artist with a vision with the needs that a user may have and this sort of higher, mission to bring people to different, kind of a different way of understanding their own minds, if I may put it that way?
Sure. I mean, I have a few anecdotes, right?
Yeah, go for it.
But before we dive into those, like just to explain how exactly the process of working with an artist looks like, right? Those artists, they never submit, actual recorded composition. They never create like a full song. What they do is we supply them with a list of guidelines. We're saying, hey, we need that many chords, that many pads, that many vocals, and they need to be in that scale. So it's a guideline document, and it depends. Those guidelines, they are different depending on whether we're working on a sleep soundscape or a focus soundscape or a running soundscape. They are different. So at the end of the day, what the artist submits is what I call a set of building blocks. They're like Lego blocks. And they're in the music industry, they're called stems. They are individual sounds from 1 to, let's say, 10 seconds long. And we then feed them into the algorithm, and the algorithm then, splices those, picks the right stems and splices them together, like overlays them with some post-processing effects, depending on what the inputs are. So the artist never actually has the full control of what is going to happen, what the algorithm is going to come up with. And this is the first thing I always say to the artist, like, you need to be prepared to let go. You're not in control. Basically, it's a new tool. You kind of throw stuff into the machine, and then you take a step back, you take your hands off, and then you kind of, hear what comes out of the machine. But there are ways, of course, to tweak the end result. Like, it's not like it's just a one-way road. No, we have built this tool set, which we're calling Endel Studio, and it's all powered by our technology that is called Endel Pacific. And so the artist has a chance of affecting the end result, of course. And it was very funny because, for example, with Grimes, she was very chill. She was like, I love the sound of it. She's like, I don't feel this particular vocal that I've added here. Let's remove that, change that to, some other vocals. It was more about her lawyers, because obviously,
that's where it always ends in the music business. The fun stops with no offense, entertainment lawyers who are listening, but when the lawyers come in, that's when things get, little less chill.
Yeah, but I mean, they had her best interest in mind.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, and I can totally understand like where they were coming from. They were like, she approved the soundscape, so the soundscape needs to appear in your products.
Wow.
Exactly the way she approved it.
You're like,
I was like, but what, we're like, what is it that she's approved? You know what I mean? Because it's like, I mean, she heard like a particular version that sounded a certain way because it was like that time of day, that weather. And they did had a bit of a hard time to kind of, acknowledging the fact that it's like the artist can never anticipate all sorts of combinations of the soundscape. Or to give you another example, when we were working with Plastic Man, Rich Houghton, right? Like who's a genius artist, like, and his music is so precise. It's so architectural. It's, it's very, very sparse in the sense that there's not a lot of sounds there.
Yeah.
But each and every sound, each and every bass, and each and every kick,
it's just perfect.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's there, and it's surgical almost. So we sent him like a few demos of what the algorithm came up with, and he came back to us, and he was like, "Well, I have some notes," and then he proceeds to open like a list of notes where he literally, he comments on a second by second basis,
Oh my
and we were
God.
like. He's like, second 45, there's this bass here, and it misses that reverb echo that I've applied there. So we're like, okay. There's a few things that we need to talk about here. So he ended up coming into our studio several times, and we've spent hours and hours just listening to what the algorithm is coming up with, and kind of setting up. We were like, please stop giving feedback on the actual sounds that you're hearing. Start giving feedback in rules. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
yeah. Train our algorithm. Don't tell us like, could you please tweak the the reverb for the second? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, because that's just not going to work. And I think I find that fascinating, and this goes back to the ideas of Brian Eno, actually. Back from, he was working on ambient music, and he's the inventor of ambient music, right? Like, he was always saying that what fascinates him about ambient music is that you create a framework, and then you kind of feed stuff into the framework, and then you take a hands-off approach, and then the system almost plays itself. So that's exactly how our algorithm works. Like, the artist, they have a lot of control over what the rules are, but then the end result is still produced by the algorithm.
Makes me think of ancient instruments like the Aeolian harp, right? Where you basically set up the parameters and see what the environment produces in terms of sound. That's really cool. Going back to our friends, the lawyers, you are really at this frontier that is a really challenging one, even though we've had generative music out, in the marketplace, for lack of a better way to put it, for 5-6 more years, right?
Yeah.
In its current iteration, and yet we're still getting law. We just had a recent there was like some recent news about basically that an AI can't be the composer for in terms of copyright in the U.S. So there's so many things to be worked out, and a lot of, you're pushing against some pretty hard and fast cultural norms of the music industry, like, artists being able to approve everything once they've reached a certain level, that kind of thing. What have you developed as an entrepreneur and as someone who's trying to sort of straddle the technological and creative sides of this, to help people understand? And you just gave that great example with Plastic Man. Are there any sort of general principles that you've developed after talking to a lot of labels, lawyers, et cetera, that you feel are valuable?
Well, I mean, it's also, another big question is the question of ownership, right? Like, which is a big, big conversation in the music industry right now. Like, each and every artist wants to know who owns their masters, like who owns the masters, right? Like, and in case of an album, obviously this is a very important question, because the masters, essentially means the songs. In our case, this question is frankly not that relevant, because if we're talking about individual stems, and some of them are just like 1 second long, like, I mean, the question of who owns the masters for those particular stems is almost irrelevant, because the algorithm, the so-called quote unquote recorded composition, and this is what everybody cares about in the music industry, the recorded composition is created on the fly every time someone presses play inside our apps. But the algorithm creates the quote unquote recorded composition, and it's never recorded, because it's never a static composition. Like, it's ever changing. So this question also, this is, I think, the question of ownership. This is something that we had to work around and kind of frankly explain to people. It comes down to explaining what the artist submits and what the end result is. In certain cases, we actually had to, play people, what the artist submitted, and we're like, listen to this, and it's like, like or like like a kick, and we're like, well, this is what the artist submitted, and now let's listen to the soundscape that is created by our algorithm on the fly right now. So we just have to explain a lot of concepts and have people listen to it. And we have been slowly but steadily developing a legal framework for what we're doing, and this was fascinating and also very interesting process. And actually our music lawyer, whose name is Henry Root, he's been in the music industry since the 60s, I believe. Like, he's worked with the Grateful Dead, for example. So he comes and he literally emails me every day and texts me every day and says that his work on Anvil is what excites him the most. He's like, this is the most fun I've had since the 60s.
Awesome.
because he's like, this is new, this is uncharted territory, and I have to explain these new concepts to all of these people. So it's just very, very, very interesting and exciting, but of course also very, very challenging. And sometimes people don't understand what we're doing here. But I can tell you that I feel that the narrative is changing. I think people are way more open now to what we're doing than they were in, say, 2019, even when we did this infamous Warner Music distribution deal, when people were massively freaking out. There were all of these headlines of like,
I remember the sort of the end of music, the end of artists,
yes.
Like all the sort of craziness that was circling around AI between like 2015, 2019. Yeah.
I feel that narrative has changed, luckily, because and we were like, no, look, this is how we use it, and there's no music without the artist, even if we're talking about AI. So yeah, that's where we are right now. But I think we're still in the kind of explanation phase, if you will. But there's some groundwork that has been laid out.
Yeah. I also think we're in this really interesting period of tension between, as you were saying, the static owned music paradigm and the constant creation, music as process, music as lifestyle extension, for lack of a better word. Like the fact that there are little instruments you can just play when you feel like, doodling around, or there's, there's, whether it's the use of stems or, how music is being broken down into smaller pieces that can be reused in new ways. And there's just so many different ways that music is becoming less of, or it's not just an owned set thing. It's more like the Grateful Dead, right? Like you never knew what you were going to hear when you went to their shows. There was, there's always been that side of things. It seems to be bursting out a little bit more thanks to some of these new technological developments.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of very interesting applications of technology to, how the music, to what I think what is being challenged right now is, frankly, what do we call music, and what is the concept of an album and a song, right? Because we know that on DSPs, music is primarily consumed through playlists, right? Like that is a playlist is now kind of the predominant form in which music is consumed. So people think playlists. They don't think individual tracks. They don't think albums even. They think playlists. And here comes Endel, and we're like, no, how about the concept of a soundscape that never ends, is this morphing, ever-changing substance that is around you and that adapts to whatever is happening in your life. And we're not even positioning this as music, right? Like we're saying, this is not something you listen to consciously. This is something you listen to when you want to achieve a certain cognitive state, want to be put in a certain cognitive state. So I think all of these concepts are very, very fascinating to me. And I think they go back to, the ideas, as I keep saying, of, Brian Eno and Steve Reich and Philip Glass, and even Eric Satie, if we go really back.
Oh man, right? Satie, shout out. He's a favorite. I'm a fangirl.
Me too. For music, right?
Yeah, some of the best music to play too, to relax. Like it is a really relaxing music to perform as well. Anyway, don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but yeah, there's been thinking along these lines for so many years about what what music could be as an experience versus a product, or this is so great. Thank you for going down some of these pathways with me. Now, this is my favorite part of our podcast because we get to get a little sci-fi. And what you were just saying, Oleg, made me think, and the fact you mentioned before that Endel wants to have multiple sensory dimensions. I would love to hear your thoughts on how Endel might incorporate a more immersive experience, like something visual. I mean, you mentioned temperature and lighting, but you also have some really talented visual designers and fine artists on your team. What's the next visual dimension for something like this? How could we enhance the effects of sound by adding a level of vision or other senses? How are you guys imagining that? Like, we can think 5 years from now, or we can get full like holodeck mode. But what are you imagining?
We can look, as far as a couple of weeks from now.
Very pragmatic, spoken like a true CEO. Thank you. I'm like, let's go to outer space. You're like, no, let's go to South by.
No, but the reason I'm bringing up, this time frame is because we're about to go live on smart TVs, right?
Yes.
Like, we're working on an Apple TV version of Endel. And this is because, we do have a visual component to each and every soundscape that we'll put out. And the idea was always, you need to be constantly mesmerized by Endel whenever you're interacting with it. So when you're opening the app and you're, like setting up a timer or choosing a soundscape, we want you to see that visualization that is also procedurally generated and created by our art director, Prote, who is, as you said, an established contemporary artist. So basically, what we're doing with the smart TV version is we're putting that visualization, that visual component of Endel, up front, because obviously this is something that you're going to be playing on your TV, and it's just going to be there all the time. So it's a much more visual audio. It's a true audiovisual experience. I guess that's what I'm saying, and that's just the very first step into the direction of us creating this multi-sensory experiences with Endel, and that's how we've always envisioned Endel. Now, if we think a few years from now, I am personally very, very, very passionate about the sound ecology of public spaces.
Yeah.
Right. And this is just something that I think we as a society do not think about at all. And, the sound ecology that we're living in, and the sound obviously affects us in a very, very serious way.
Yeah.
And no one is thinking about how places like, airports or railway stations or the underground, like all of these places, they're just some of the streets in the cities that we live in, they're just very, very polluted in terms of sound. So this is something I want to tackle as well. This is something I'm really passionate about, creating a soundscape that is being played in hospitals, railway stations, airports, just frankly creating a soundscape for like a block, something like a street block. Something like this. And this is what I'm really passionate about, and this is what I'm hoping that we're going to be able to do with Endel in the next kind of, let's say, 12 to 24 months time frame.
That would be incredible to have the sound of a block, or especially if it could incorporate whatever the materials of the building and the dimensions of the street. And, you could come up with all sorts of interesting parameters that would reflect this sort of architectural environment, as well as, the natural sounds that may occur there. That's really cool. I think a lot about how when we change from internal combustion engines to electric motors or electric engines, we're going to be hearing more and more different kinds of sounds. As an American, you notice a lot of vehicle sounds in the U.S. So we're, had lots of loud vehicles. So, anyway, this has been really great. Thank you so much, Oleg, for your time and for this fascinating conversation.
Thank you for having me. It was very fun.
Eleanor here with some big news. The Music Tectonics Conference returns for 2022, October 25th through 27th. After riding the waves of pandemic change online and in the metaverse, our fourth annual conference is returning to an all-in-person format in the Los Angeles area. We're planning 3 days in Santa Monica, California for panels, keynotes, exhibitors, a startup pitch competition, networking, and connecting. We've selected offbeat venues in easy walking distance of each other and the beach. Early bird tickets go on sale April 5th at musictectonics.com. Mark your calendar, set an alarm, tell your virtual assistant whatever it takes, because the first 25 people to register will get a super early bird discount. If you're not getting my newsletter, head over to musictectonics.com now and sign up. You'll get updates on the music tech and innovation programming we're planning for this year's conference, insider deals, and more. See you in California this October.
Thanks for listening to Music Tectonics. If you like what you hear, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. We have new episodes for you every week. Did you know you can dig deeper into all our episodes with the show notes at musictectonics.com. While you're there, look for the latest about our annual conference, sign up for our newsletter to get updates, or get the Music Tectonics app for music tech news. Everything we do explores seismic shifts that shake up music and technology the way the Earth's tectonic plates cause quakes and make mountains. Connect with Music Tectonics on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and find me, Dmitry Vitsa, if you can spell it, on LinkedIn. Bye-bye!
You're listening to Music Tectonics.